I'm going to read chapter 14 of, Baron Trump's Marvellous Underground Journey. Bulger and I turn our backs on the fair domain of Queen Crystallina, nature's wonderful speaking tube. Hey, just like YouTube. Crystallina attempt to turn us back, how I kept Bulger from yielding, some incidents of our journey along the marble highway, and how we came to the glorious gateway of solid silver. Me, the sorrowing Sebastian, loaded with as heavy a heart as ever a mortal of my size had borne away with him. Did the wise Bulger lead along the broad and silent highway farther, and yet farther from the city of the Menkees, until at last the music of the fountains, pattering in their crystal basins, died away in the distance, and the darkness far behind me. I felt that my wise little brother was right, and so I followed on after, with not a sigh or a syllable to stay him. But he halted at last, and as I felt about me, I discovered that I was standing beside one of the richly carved seats that one so often meets along the marble highway. I was quite as foot-weary as I was heart-heavy, and reaching out I touched the spring, which I knew would transform the seat into a bed, and clambering upon it, with my wise Bulger nestled beside me, I fell into a deep and refreshing sleep. When I awoke, and sitting up, looked back toward Queen Crystallina's capital, I could see the river of light pouring down its flood of white rays far away in the distance, but only a faint reflection came out to where we had passed the night. And then I knew that my faithful companion had led me to the very uttermost limit of the Mekamenke domain before he had halted. Yes, sure enough, for as I raised my eyes, there, towering above the bed, stood the slender crystal column which marked the end of Goggle Land, and upon its face I read the extract from a royal decree forbidding a Menkame to overstep the limit under pain of incurring the Queen's most serious displeasure. Before me was darkness and uncertainty. Behind me lay the fair kingdom of the transparent folk, yet in sight, lighted up like a long line of happy homes in which the fires were blazing, bright and warm on the hearthstones. Did I turn back? Did I hesitate? No. I could see a pair of speaking eyes fixed upon me, and could hear a low line of impatient coaxing me along. Stooping down, I fastened a bit of silken cord taken from the bed to Bulger's collar, and bade him lead the way. It was a long while before the light of Queen Crystallina's city faded entirely, and even when it ceased to be of any service in making known to me the grandeur and beauty of the vast underground passage, I could still see it glitter like a silver star away behind me. But it disappeared at last, and then I felt that I had parted forever with the dear little princess, with the speck in her heart. Bulger didn't seem to have the slightest difficulty in keeping in the center of the marble highway, and never allowed the leading string to slack up for a moment. However, it was by no means a tramp through utter darkness, for the lizards of which I had already spoken, aroused by the sound of my footfalls, snapped their tails and lighted up their tiny flash torches in eager attempts to discover whence the noise proceeded, and what sort of a being it was that had invaded their silent domains. We had covered possibly 2 leagues, when suddenly a low and mysterious voice, as soft and gentle as it had dropped from the clear, starry heavens of my own beautiful world, reached my ear. "Sebastian! Sebastian!" it murmured. Before I could stop to think, I uttered a cry of wonder, and the noise of my voice seemed to awaken 10,000 of the tiny living flashlights inhabiting the cracks and crevices of the vast arched corridor, flooding it for a moment or so with a soft and roseate radiance. "Sebastian! Sebastian!" again murmured the mellow and echo-like voice, coming from the very walls of rock behind me. Hastily drawing near to the spot whence the words seemed to come, I laid my ear against the smooth face of the rock. Again the same the soft sighing voice pronounced my name so clearly and so close beside me that I reached out to grasp Crystallina's hand, for hers was the voice. The same low, sweet voice that had told me of her sorrow in the spectral garden. But there was no one there. In reaching out, however, I passed my left hand along the face of the wall, and it had marked the presence of a round, smooth opening in its rocky face, an opening about the size of a rainwater pipe in the upper world. Instantly it flashed upon my mind that through some whim of nature, this opening extended for leagues back towards the city of the Megameges, through the miles of solid rock, and opened in the very throne room of the Princess Crystallina. Yes, I was right, for after a moment or so again, the same low, sweet voice came through the speaking tube of nature's own making, and fell upon my eager ear. I waited until it had ceased, and setting my mouth in front of the opening, I murmured in strong but gentle tones, "Farewell, dear Princess Crystallina. Bulger and the little Baron both bid thee a farewell." And then, raising Bulger in my arms, I bade him weep for his royal friend, whom he would never see again. He gave a long, low, piteous cry, half whine, half howl, and then I listened for Crystallina's voice. It was not long in coming. "Farewell, dear Bulger, farewell, dear Sebastian. Crystallina will never forget you until her poor heart with the speck in it runs down, and the crystal throne knows her no more. Poor Bulger." It now became my turn to tear him from this spot, for Crystallina's voice, sounding thus unexpectedly in his ears, had aroused all the deep affection which he had so ruthlessly smothered in order to bring his little master to his senses and free him from the charm of Crystallina's grace and beauty. but in vain. All my strength, all my entreaties were powerless to move him from the place. Evidently, Crystallina had heard me pleading with Bulger, and had imagined that now I would waver and stand irresolute. Heed dear Bulger's prayer, O beloved, she pleaded, and turn back to thy disconsolate Crystallina, whom thou madest so happy for a brief moment. Madest, I guess, sorry. Turn back, oh turn back. Bulger now began to whine and cry most piteously. I felt that something must be done at once, or the most direful consequences might ensue. That Bulger, crazed by the sweet tones of Crystallina's voice, might break away from me and dart away in mad race back to the city of the Menkaminkies, back to the fair young queen of the crystal throne. It became necessary for me to resort to trick and artifice to save my dear little brother from his own loving heart. Drawing his head up against my body and covering his eyes with my left arm, I quickly unloosed my neckerchief and, thrusting it into this wonderful speaking tube, closed it effectively. And thus I saved my faithful Bulger from himself. Thus I closed his ears to the music of Crystallina's voice. But it was not until after a good hour's waiting that he could bring himself to believe that his beloved friend would speak no more. After several hours more of journeying along the marble highway, a speck of light caught my eye far on ahead, and I redoubled my pace to reach it quickly. I was soon rewarded for my trouble by entering a wonderful chamber, circular in form, with a domed roof. In the center of this fair temple of the underground world sprang a glorious fountain, with a mighty rush of waters, which brought with them such a phosphorescence that this vast round chamber was lighted up with a pale yellow light, in which the countless crystals of the roof and sides sparkled magnificently. Here we passed the night, or what I called the night, refreshing ourselves with food, which I had brought from the kingdom of the Menkaminkies, and drinking and bathing in the wonderful fountain which leaped into the air with a rush and a whir, and filled it with a strange and fitful radiance. Upon awakening, both Bulger and I felt greatly refreshed, both in body and mind, and we made haste to seek out the lofty portal opening upon the marble highway, and were soon trudging along it again. Hour after hour we kept on our feet, for something told me that we could not be far away from the confines of some other domain of this world within a world, and this inward prompting of mine proved to be correct, for Bulger suddenly gave a joyful bark and began to caper about as much as to say, "O little master, if thou hadst my keen scent, thou wouldst know that we are drawing near to human habitations of some kind." Sure enough, in a few moments, a faint light came creeping in beneath the mighty arches of the broad corridor, and every instant it gathered in strength, until now I could see clearly about me, and then all of a sudden I caught sight of the source of this shy and unsteady light. There, in front of me, towered two gigantic candelabra of carved and chased and polished silver, both crowned with 100 lights, one on each side of the marble highway. Not the dull soft flames of oil or wax, but the white tongues of fire produced by ignited gas, escaping from the chemist's retort. It was marvelous. It was magnificent. And I stood looking up at these great clusters of tongues of flames, spellbound by the glorious illumination thus set in silent majesty at this gateway to some city of the underworld. Bulger's warning growl brought me to myself, but I must end this chapter here, dear friends, and halt to collect my thoughts before I proceed to tell you what I saw. After passing this glorious gateway, illumined by these two gigantic candelabra of solid silver. Well, sweetie, we're going to have to say nighty-night now. Chapter 15 we'll read next time, okay? Good night, sweet dreams.